Hello, and welcome to Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu. The Sharjah Art Foundation is an advocate, catalyst, and producer of contemporary art within the Emirate of Sharjah and the surrounding region. In dialogue with the international arts community, the Foundation advances an experimental and wide-ranging programmatic model that supports the production and presentation of contemporary art, preserves and celebrates the distinct culture of the region, and encourages a shared understanding of the transformational role of art. Organized by the Foundation, Sharjah Biennial's 16th edition, SB16, convenes under the title To Carry, a multivocal and open-ended proposition, exploring the ever-expanding questions of what it means to carry and how to carry it. SB16 is an invitation to encounter the different formations and positions of the 5 curators, as well as the constellation of resonances they have gathered. Curated by Aliyah Swastika, Amal, Khalaf, Megan Tamati Quinnell, Natasha Jin, and Zainab Oz, the biennial unveiled more than 650 works by nearly 200 participants, including more than 200 new commissions. The biennial was launched on February 6, 2025, and will continue through June 15, 2025. During this exclusive capsule season, I'll engage in dialogue and discourse with artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial who are presenting new commissions. Throughout the series, you'll hear from artists across the globe, from Australia and Kenya to London and Nigeria and more. You'll hear us discuss a wide range of topics, from each artist's practice to their reflections on our society and the questions they investigate through their work. Please join me as I share these dynamic conversations with you, exploring the ins and outs and inner worlds of artists participating in the Sharjah Biennial with their newly commissioned works. Let's go! On this episode, I'm joined by Ndidi Dike as we discuss her newly commissioned works presented for the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial, elucidated through the curatorial theme To Carry, asking questions such as what does it mean to carry a home, a history, a language, a legacy, and a lineage. Ndidi Dike was born in London. She returned to Nigeria to train as a painter and graduated from the University of Nigeria with a BA in mixed media painting. Although internationally known as a sculptor, having taught herself to sculpt, Dike primarily works as a multimedia artist with a special interest in personal archives and long-term research-based projects and engagement with global histories to address the pre- and post-colonial historic and socioeconomic of the enslaved, of forced migration, and memory, among other issues. In this episode, Dike discusses her art practice, focusing on installations that examine complex themes such as pre- and post-colonialism, global capitalism, and the impacts of the resource extraction industry in Africa, particularly in the Democratic Republic of Congo and Madagascar. She reflects on her latest works, showcased at the Sharjah Biennial 16, which draw parallels between markets in Lagos, Nigeria, and Sharjah, the United Arab Emirates, while emphasizing the necessity of metaphors in her work to convey deeper narratives and the significance of collaboration in enriching her artistic practice. Let's dive into my next episode with Ndidi Dike.
Hello everybody, my name is Ndidi Dike. I regard myself as a multidisciplinary artist and sculptor based in Lagos, and various themes and bodies of work address the social, political signs of modern times, with a particular focus on how the experience of pre- and post-colonialism and global capitalism have shaped contemporary urban sculptures. I also deal with the history of the enslaved, gender issues. I talk about the natural resource extractive industrial complex as regards to this exploitation on the continent, and I've focused on the Democratic Republic of Congo and Madagascar. And for Madagascar, it's vanilla, the second most important or sought after spice in the world today.
Wonderful. We can jump into the first question. We met for the first time in Sharjah for the opening of the Sharjah Biennial 16, and you have 3 works on view in the biennial. I'd like to start talking a bit about those works. Through your installations, you draw parallels between the markets in Lagos, Nigeria, and Sharjah, United Arab Emirates. What parallels have you noticed?
I think it's important that I emphasize the fact that the 3 installations I have in the Sharjah Biennial 16 were all conceptualized before my participation in the Venice Biennial, which was in 2024, Nigeria Imaginary Pavilion. So I've been working on these 3 bodies of works for quite a while, well before Venice. In this particular work called Connected Histories and Contested Assemblies, I think I explored the industrialization and growth of international trade in Sharjah and also in Nigeria. The comparisons or altered perceptions that I found interesting was that in Nigeria, we have what we call the second-hand market. It's all to do with second-hand drugs, including fridges, air conditioners, you name it. But the major emphasis in that market is actually cars. And I also saw that so the comparisons for me were to an extent aesthetic, like how the products are shown, how they're displayed, and so on and so forth. So for me as an artist, viewing these things from an aesthetic point of view, I thought that there was a lot of cross-pollination on how works are mounted, how they're displayed. And I thought it would be nice to compare those 2 countries and how they both address the issue of second-hand products. And I found that in the industrial markets of Connecticut and Lagos, it was best to express it through the polycarbonate installation, which you saw, which is basically collages and montages of different aspects of these markets that I now put into a structure where you could view them next to each other. You know what I mean?
Yes, definitely.
And then also excerpts from visually aesthetic forms and photographic aggregates, which were mined from my personal archives and lens-based material sources in the market itself and also from the internet. And I felt that there was a need to show or emphasize the long and complex history of trade between these 2 regions, which of course obviously touch on the topics of labor, the commodification of second-hand products, and so on and so forth.
Yes, and when we spoke and we looked at your installation, there's one piece in particular that stands out to me.
Connected Histories, Contested Assemblies.
Yes, so that installation, Connected Histories, Contested Assemblies, in that installation you have archival photography of the transatlantic slave trade. And we spoke at length about the Industrial Revolution, and you really made it a point to share with me that it's something that you think about in your work, that you are reminded to never forget how we arrived where we are today.
I think you said it quite well, but I'll try and expand on it a little bit. We are living in modern times, so at times we tend to forget how we got here or what actually created this modernity that we now live in and benefit from. And what I try to emphasize with that image in famous Brooks Plan of how the slaves were laid in the ships during the Middle Passage and on that journey to the New World or the Americas and Brazil and Jamaica and the islands. So I felt that it's important for us to not forget that aspect of our history is actually the genesis of the industrialization, of the Industrial Revolution. And I just feel that even though we're talking about contemporary times, we need to remember how we got to where we are now. So once in a while, I like to put in that image as a reminder, lest we forget where these resources or how these resources were produced and where they were gotten from, and how America was developed and how Europe was developed. So I feel it's necessary that we continue to have that reminder for people to realize that Belgium is a very good example. The history of Belgium and Leopold and the issue of rubber and latex and maiming. What would Belgium be without the appropriation and acquisition of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in terms of latex? I'm not even going to go to lithium or other natural resources. So these are just things that I think we need to be constantly reminded of. Another important point that you and I spoke about, this has also been done with the duplicity and complicity of people on the continent as well.
Yeah, and that's such a complex and challenging point to even consider, because on the one hand, you say to yourself, I guess there's no one hand, there's just right or wrong. And I think one can easily argue that African nations and African leaders have been highly complicit in the resource extraction, the corruption, and the oppression and suffering of their own people.
Definitely. We mustn't forget that. And then also, if you remember, at the lower portion of my installation, I had a lot of fake designer goods on the floor.
Yes, I remember you addressed the history of trade, consumer goods, perceived value, and also the proliferation of counterfeit goods, many of which are made on the continent of Africa.
They are made on the continent of Africa and actually derived from the continent of Africa. When you look at a lot of the symbology, the motifs, the patterns, the color schemes, a lot of them originally came from Africa, but you hardly have any acknowledgement of that aspect. So I felt that it's important that we talk about that aspect as well, because even when you and I look at some of these fake designer goods, we know the origins.
Yeah.
So I wanted to also emphasize that exploitation and that non-acknowledgement of artists and creative people who actually designed and propagated those motifs and symbols and whatever, but are never acknowledged.
Yes. And as we talk about that work a little bit more deeply, for the folks who are listening in who may not have an opportunity to go to Sharjah and see the work in person, can you describe a little bit more about the work and what's happening and what's taking place in the installation you've created?
It's a bit difficult, isn't it?
Yeah.
What could we use as a reference so that we visually bring this into people's minds?
Yeah, that's such a good question. I remember entering the space, and it's pretty to be centered where it is in front of the port on the water, but it's very quiet. You walk in and it's low lit. It immediately puts you into a different environment. Right?
Conjures up a different environment, and I think I would say that in terms of its location, which those are old warehouses that were used when the issue of dates and spices was a very prominent part of the Sharjah economy. So it's actually quite relevant that I'm talking about trade and exploitation and labor and all those resources. So it was actually, architecturally, it was in the right space. But what I did was I had these long strips of something similar to negatives. Each and every panel, the panels are about 6 feet high by about 3 feet wide, and there were 5, which were assembled or installed in a circle, because I'm talking about the cycles of trade and how things go around and come around. It was also a work that you could walk around and look at all the different chapters and layers and images of Sharjah, Ladikwo, and a bit of the history of the enslaved. And then as you look towards the bottom of the installation, I left some areas that were pretty transparent, and then I had some counterfeit designer goods on the floor. So it was like you were looking into a window. It was like you were window shopping.
Yes.
It was also like you were looking at things that are unobtainable, in terms of the fact that generally designer goods are very expensive. To the average person, they're not going to be able to buy them. But at the same time, there is a proliferation of the fake designer market and compromise once again.
No, I think what's really interesting to reflect on now is you saying that there's this, and when one walks into the space, you see that there's a barrier between the viewer and all of the consumer goods that are arranged and very thoughtfully placed on the ground. You can't touch those items. And so there's this metaphoric understanding that you also maybe, you don't necessarily have access to them. You can't acquire them.
Yeah. Yes, I use a lot of metaphors in my work, and that's a very good example.
Absolutely. It was something that I found quite striking, just like the orientation of how you placed everything. And I think that's also what brings me to the idea of why installation work can be such a captivating experience for a viewer, because there are so many things that one can consider. You put some sort of barrier in front of something, and now you're engaging in a completely different conversation.
And yes, that's really good. And what I also try to do is that kind of installation methodology, it reflects on the consumer culture and its disparities between race and class, in terms of We know some of these products are available to a certain class and level of people, but the average man on the street would never ever be able to perhaps acquire some of those, especially if you're dealing with the originals. And how the issue and proliferation of second-hand markets, I believe, is actually geared towards the global south. Because who are the major consumers of these second-hand goods that we talk about? Not just in terms of Sharjah and car parts, but look at the issue of second-hand clothes, for example. Look at the issue of anything second-hand. Where do you send it to? Who is going to buy it?
Absolutely. Next question, because I think we're getting deeper into it. As a multidisciplinary artist, how do you think about the way in which you utilize different mediums to translate your ideas?
I think the objects, the media that have metaphors, and various kind of media that I use in my work is dictated by the things that I want to work or address. Like the work we just discussed, right?
Yes.
I doubt whether we could have the depth of what we were trying to, or what I was trying to say in a painting. So you have to find relevant materials and objects and ideas on how you can talk about and address those things that you feel are quite pertinent to that particular moment in time when you're addressing a particular issue.
Yeah.
And then you begin to decipher and decide on, okay, how best can I express my feelings?
Yes. You find the medium that best supports and helps translate those ideas.
It certainly can't be painting anymore. There are so many different medias that you can use to translate and express what you want to say in your work.
Absolutely.
I know that for the future, I'll probably begin to incorporate film as well.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's all those kind of things that really dictate to you and help you to experiment and explore with different ideas on how you want your theme or your topic or your chapter or whatever to come across to the audience that engages with your work.
In addressing the complex issues of globalization and migration in your work, how do you translate these ideas around these very complex topics into visual narratives?
I do a lot of research before I begin to engage particular topics or themes in my work. And I guess that idea of researching, exploring, also comes to bear in terms of how I'm going to express myself in a particular installation. For example, I'll go back to collective histories. The research for that work was actually started in 2022 when I came forward with the architecture group. But initially I was going to be a part of that, but things changed and I became a part of the most recent Sharjah Biennial 16. I've been thinking about, I'm fascinated with the issue of the gargoyle fishing traps, purely from a sculptural aesthetic.
Yes.
So you can imagine I've been pondering over those fascinating and beautiful shapes and images that I had as far back as 2022. When you're doing your research or you're experimenting or you're exploring, there's certain things that stick in your mind and you begin to try to work out a way on how you're going to express that in the work that you make in the future. I think that's the best way I can describe.
Next one. In a 2021 article with Vanguard News, the Nigerian newspaper, you spoke about the role of an artist in times of crisis, as you addressed recent work that you'd made in response to the COVID-19 pandemic at Art 21 Gallery in Victoria Island, Lagos. The exhibition was titled Working Through an Impasse. As you reflect on where we are now, what do you think the role of an artist in times of crisis is?
I don't know about the role of an artist in times of crisis. I'm not the one to say this is an artist's role because everybody is different, everybody's independent, everybody has different opinions.
Yes.
I think that kind of question should come from an art historian or a curator or somebody in the academia. But having said that, if you remember, there's this famous quote by Toni Morrison. She talks about how in times of crisis, that is the time artists should go to work. When things are hard or when you're going through a particular crisis or having particular challenges in your life as a creative person, that is inevitably, I think, a motivation or a trigger to create work.
As we round out the episode with just a few more questions, I want to share that this show is about a lot of things, but mostly it's about having conversations about how visual art and creative forms of expression contribute to society and culture. It's about uncovering an artist's practice, understanding how they see the world, and engaging in conversation about the visual landscape. As you consider the premise of this show, can you speak about any collaborations that you've done that have been particularly enriching for you and allowed you to think about the interconnectedness of your work and the person, place, or institution that you're working with? Society, culture, contemporary issues through the lens of visual arts. I really want to pull on the idea of collaboration and the idea of how collaboration and being in dialogue and being in conversation with either another person, if you're in dialogue with a place where you do a residency, if you're in dialogue with an institution where you're working on a project, how have those moments and experiences really impacted you and impacted your practice?
I was working with the curator, Alice Watson. She was my curator for my participation in this current Biennale.
Yes.
I've done a residency in Georgia some years ago, and we've been in contact ever since. And I guess the evolution and the conceptualization of this work has actually been, of course, in collaboration with her. I think as an artist, you always find it more interesting when you have different people or different ideas that can bring different nuances or new interpretations to your work. And I and Aliyah have always worked very well. And I think that's evident in the installations that I came up with during this Sharjah Biennial 16. I did a residency in Georgia, I've done a mini residency in Sharjah. Of course, I live in Lagos. So all these different sites come to bear in my work. But the collaboration with Aliyah was absolutely enriching. It was a very good experience for me.
As we finish with the last question, what does the curatorial theme of the Sharjah Biennial 16 to carry mean to you?
Yeah, I thought a lot about that because it's so encompassing, I think, which is the beauty of the biennial. It's so encompassing. It allows for many interpretations and not this one-dimensional narrative that people like you and I are always grappling with. One of the ways in which I would describe this in my own words would be to respect, to care, to facilitate, to nurture, to collaborate, to dream, to invest, to encounter, to value, to appreciate, to teach, to have patience, and the last one is to set the tone for the future. That's the way I would describe this current Sharjah Biennial 16.
So beautiful. That's a really wonderful and special way to end the show, and I couldn't agree with you more. This has been such a lovely episode. For everyone listening, if you have an opportunity to visit the Sharjah Biennial in person, I encourage you to go and see Ndidi Dike's installation and her series of works that investigate important critical issues that we're facing in our world today, and does that through the lens of visual arts. Ndidi, thank you so much for joining me for a wonderful episode. I was so happy to speak with you today.
Oh, yes. Shade, thank you for taking the time out to organize this conversation. I'm very happy to have been able to expand and give you a little bit more depth into my practice as an artist and into my contributions to the 16 connected histories, contested assemblies, notions of maritime crossings and hybridity, and intercontinental dispersals. Thank you very much for having me, and thank you for your time.
That was my episode with Ndidi Dike. I want to give a big thank you and a big shout out to Ndidi for joining me on the show. Thank you for tuning in to this capsule season of Lightwork Presents Everything is Connected, the Sharjah Biennial 16 edition, sponsored by the Sharjah Art Foundation. These episodes were recorded both on site and remotely during the opening week and after the opening of the 16th edition of the Sharjah Biennial. During the episodes, you will hear the sights and sounds of the local environment from the various sites across the Emirate of Sharjah where the biennial takes place. I'm your host, Folasade Ologundudu, and I'll see you next time. Stay tuned for my next episode. As always, stay motivated, stay inspired, and stay up. Peace and love to all.